Hello, listeners, and welcome to another edition of our interview feature, which we include in our recordings. This time, Constance MSP has taken some time out of her busy schedule and agreed to sit in the hot seat. So, without further ado, we'll begin. Welcome, Angela, and thank you very much for making the time available to speak to us.
Thank you very much, Ray, and I'm absolutely delighted to be interviewed for Boomerang Talk newspapers. I think this is a wonderful initiative about reaching out to people, and more power to your elbow. So it's a privilege to be interviewed today.
Thank you. Can you give our listeners a brief introduction to you as a person? What's your background? How long have you been a member of the Scottish Parliament? And are there any interesting snippets that our listeners could know?
So I was first elected to the Scottish Parliament in May 2007. So I've been a member of the Scottish Parliament for nearly 18 years. 2007 is also the same year that I had my son. So my son is also now 18, approaching 18 years old, not quite 18 yet. So it was quite a lifestyle change, becoming both an MSP and a new mum. In the same year, I was elected in the May and my son was born in the autumn. So life has always been very full on. The constituency in 2007 was called Livingston, but by 2011, the name had changed to Amman Valley. And the great privilege that I have is that I represent the constituency in which I grew up in. And although I was born in Blackburn, I wasn't, and Blackburn isn't in the Amman Valley constituency. From a very young age, my family moved to Addywell. So I'm a lassie from Addywell. And I grew up in Addywell in the 70s and 80s. And that very much informed my own political thinking. Life was somewhat difficult for West Lothian people at that time, and that also included my family. At one point in the 80s, male unemployment was running at 1 in 4. My dad had a lengthy period of unemployment, and that was very germane and relevant to me, particularly in some of the later jobs that I had as a government minister. I was the first in my family to go to university. I'm a graduate of the University of Glasgow and the University of Stirling. Before I was a parliamentarian, I was a social worker. I was both a hospital social worker and a prison social worker. And I did part of my social work training in West Lothian. One of my placements was attached to Ward 3 at St John's Hospital, the psychogeriatric ward. When I qualified, I then went on to become a mental health officer as well as a forensic social worker, so particular duties under the mental health legislation. And that sometimes sadly involved going to court to detain people in hospital against their will when they were so unwell that they weren't able to look after themselves, or they were a risk to themselves or indeed to others. And I worked at the State Hospital for 5-6 years before I was elected to the Scottish Parliament. And before that, I also worked in 3 Scottish prisons, Glenorchy, Friarton and Perth. So I had a lengthy working career before I became an MSP. So I feel, because of my background, growing up in West Lothian, growing up in Addywell, and my training and years of service as a social worker, that has always given me a good hinterland in terms of working with people, representing people, supporting people, but it's been very relevant to many of the ministerial jobs that I've held within the Scottish Government.
That's really impressive. I note you're currently the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs in the Scottish Government, and I would imagine that your job is really demanding. Can you tell us what other cabinet roles you've had, and is there any one position that's been the most satisfying for you?
Well, You're correct. I'm currently the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs, and in many ways that's a job that I've always wanted to do within government. So again, it's a great privilege to have that responsibility, which covers police, prisons, courts, civil and criminal law. And you're right, it is a very demanding and busy role, Ray. It is, however, my 8th position in government. I've held 4 Cabinet Secretary posts, and Cabinet Secretary post means that you are part of Cabinet. I've served under 4 First Ministers, and I've also held 4 junior ministerial roles. And they're all very special in their own right. I'm particularly proud of the work that I did when I was a Junior Minister for Skills and Lifelong Learning, when I was Cabinet Secretary for Education, when I was Minister for Youth Employment. And those jobs were particularly important to me because of my family's experience of unemployment. I always felt very privileged that despite my working class upbringing in Addiewell, that I had the opportunity to go to university. So ensuring that that ladder of opportunity was available to other young Scots from less privileged backgrounds is a particular principle that I will uphold to my core. I'm also, a particular highlight for me is around the work that I did around youth employment. Post the financial crash, youth unemployment rose to 25%. It was at its peak, it was 113,000 young Scots unemployed. And the work that we did in terms of investing in opportunities, investing in modern apprenticeships, the work to improve vocational education and have things like foundation apprenticeships, which are alive as an educational opportunity that's available in West Lothian schools and also helpfully facilitated by our wonderful West Lothian College as well. So that work was particularly important to me. There are other jobs that I've held that I've had equal importance. But just in terms of highlights, when I was the Cabinet Secretary for Communities, Social Security and Equalities, there were 2 aspects of that work that were particularly precious to me. One was the work with refugees to ensure that Scotland remained a welcoming home for those seeking refuge and asylum. And when I met refugees, and I'm thinking in particular about refugees from the Syrian community, who, despite everything that they had been through, that they were so pleased to find some peace in Scotland and grateful to be here and, wanted to make a difference to Scotland as well. The other aspect of the work that I did when I was Community Secretary was laying the foundations for Social Security Scotland. So this is 2016-17. There were new social security powers devolved to the Scottish Parliament. And we had to set up Social Security Scotland from the ground up, from scratch. And that was a huge opportunity to do things differently. So Social Security Scotland is not the departments of work and pension, had dignity, fairness and respect at the heart of making policy decisions about benefits, but also the way in which Social Security Scotland would engage with people. And there are several benefits now available in Scotland that are not available elsewhere in the UK, and that is due to the foundations getting it right from the start when we established Social Security Scotland. I talk a lot about the Scottish Child Payment because while it was another colleague who delivered the nuts and bolts and delivered that policy in terms of the foundations of the policy direction and the infrastructure to put in place, the work I did in the First Child Poverty Delivery Plan was pivotal. And the Scottish Child Payment has lifted thousands of children out of poverty here in West Lothian, but obviously many more thousands of children across Scotland. And right now, Scotland is the only place in the UK where child poverty is falling as opposed to rising. And that is because of our decisions and investments around the Scottish Child Payment. And the other job that I did, I was Minister for Drugs Policy. And as you know, Scotland has the highest drug deaths in Europe.
Mm.
And the work that I did put in place the platforms of reform, built up the national mission to save and improve lives. We have invested and expanded in residential rehabilitation, and that includes increasing the capacity at LEAP. That's the Lothians in Edinburgh Addictions Project, and that includes, detox facilities and also residential rehab as well. It's run by the NHS, and I was very pleased to increase investment in that so they could increase their capacity. There is other work that I was pivotal in terms of laying the foundation stones for the safer consumption facility that is opened in Glasgow, the Thistle Centre. And it may feel counterintuitive. I'm a big fan of abstinence-based models. I'm a big fan of the recovery movement, and we've got an amazing recovery movement here in West Lothian. I'm thinking about people like Kevin Neary, who leads Aid and Abet. I'm thinking about Aidan Martin in the scheme, thinking about, all those organisations such as AA. So I'm full square behind the recovery movement. But I also recognise that there will be people who will be in the depths of addiction and they're not ready to give up. So meantime, what do we do to keep people safe? How do we reach them? How do we keep people alive? And the Safer Drugs Consumption Facility in Glasgow, the opening of the Thistle Centre, is a big step forward, because it's just about reaching out to people wherever they are, whatever depths or despair they're in. It's about reaching out to them, making that connection. Because what I know from my prisons work, from my work as Justice Secretary, it's often the times when public services are able to change lives is at the times where we've met people wherever they are in their despair, and have been pragmatic to find ways to keep people safe and to reach out to them. So I do feel very privileged to have had the opportunity to serve my constituents in Amman Valley. And it's been an additional privilege to serve in the Scottish Government. But I'm also very determined, very resilient, Ray, and I've still got lots of work to do.
Well, that brings me very satisfactorily on to the next part. You've already told us about your standout moments of your career so far, and there are parliamentary elections next year. That's unfortunately a fact. And is there any one thing that you want to get completed before we're thrown into the next parliamentary session after the elections?
Well, there's more than one thing.
Oh.
There's more than one thing. In my role as Cabinet Secretary for Justice, it's a role that's always very heavy with legislation. So I have done more legislation, taken more bills through Parliament in this role than I have in any other government role that I've had the privilege of holding. So in the last 12 months, I've taken through the Police Ethics, Conduct and Scrutiny Bill, emergency post office legislation, and that was about the post office, the sub post office masters and mistresses
thing, yeah.
Yes, who were unfairly convicted in the Horizon scandal. So we, in Scotland, because we've got a different legal system, we had to find a way to legally but also practically identify people who we believe had unfair convictions. So there was a very important piece of legislation. I've taken through legislation in relation to prisons. There's also been a Children's Care and Justice Bill and the Bail and Release Bill. So in terms of legislation I need to get through Parliament in the coming year, I have the Victims' Witness and Justice Reform Bill. And that's a big landmark piece of legislation. It will introduce a Victims and Witness Commissioner, and that's about holding criminal justice agencies to account, ensuring that the needs of victims and witnesses are at the very heart of our justice system. Historically, why the bill will have historical importance, the bill also seeks to abolish the not proven verdict. Scotland is very unusual in that we have 3 verdicts. Most other comparable modern jurisdictions have 2 verdicts, either guilty or not guilty, or proven or not proven. In Scotland, however, we have 2 verdicts of acquittal. So as well as having guilty, we have not guilty and not proven. And the difficulty with not proven is that people don't understand what it means. There is no legal definition. Judges aren't allowed to give any guidance to juries. And the research that's been done in Scotland has showed that juries often see it as a compromise verdict. And in that, they are sometimes thinking they're giving out a kind of message to either the accused or to the victim that, you know, we believe you, but we can't prove it, or we don't believe you and we just can't prove it. And the onus of proof is on the Crown to prove someone's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. So that is a big landmark reform to our justice system, abolishing the not proven verdict, because victims find it deeply traumatic, and for the accused it creates a lingering stigma. Other parts of the Victims, Witness and Justice Reform Bill is that we want to improve the experience of victims and witnesses, particularly in sexual offence cases. So we are seeking to create a specialist sexual offences court, and that's about ensuring that we understand the trauma that people have experienced, and also that the justice system, if we're honest, can compound the trauma that victims and witnesses experience. And I also have other legislation that's about modernising the criminal justice system, essentially locking in some of the gains that we had to make during COVID. There was a lot done in the justice system that had to be done by wet signatures. Yeah. So there's a lot more that is done electronically now. So it's far easier for police officers to get a warrant from a sheriff, as opposed to having to send 2 police officers to get a sheriff to sign it. You know, that can all be done electronically within a few hours. So we want lock in those gains. And I suppose there are other gains that we have made, I'm thinking, over the past 18 years, which hasn't been an easy time for Scotland. We've had a financial crash, we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, and then we've had the cost of living crisis. And all of that has been, at each and every turn, a major disruptor to businesses, but also to people's standard of living. So I want to ensure that we, you know, lock in the gains that we've made, you know, whether that's in and around Social Security Scotland or Scottish Child Payment, the baby box, but also build on that with the work that now needs done around, for example, the winter fuel payment that the Scottish Government will introduce. And that is about ensuring that we, you know, reduce and eradicate poverty. I still think there's a lot more to do locally and nationally to support businesses, particularly as we still bear the brunt of Brexit. And given the impact of COVID on the NHS, I want to build on the progress that has been made nationally. Our NHS had a target to provide 64,000 procedures by January this year. They actually more than met that by achieving 75,000 procedures. So we need to be really focused on improving delivery of our NHS further, and I'm pleased that the Scottish Government budget, a record £21 billion, will help us do that. But I'm very focused on the cost of living crisis that people continue to experience. In particular, the cost of energy is causing real hardship to households, but also to businesses. Now, energy is reserved, but there are, some measures that the Scottish Government has and will take to address that.
What a busy lady. You've just done so much. But you've still got lots of work to do before the elections. And presumably in amongst all these bills and so on, you still have your constituency meetings and you're able to help with certain matters. So can you tell our listeners, if they are your constituents, how they get in contact with you and what kind of issues you can help with?
So let me first scope out the Almond Valley constituency. The Almond Valley constituency starts at Wilkeston, goes all the way through Kirknewton, the Calders, East Calder, all the way through to West Calder, Breich Valley, Stonyburn, Falthouse. Currently includes Seafield, but that may change if depending on what the Boundary Commission do. It also includes Pumperston, Uphall Station, and all of Livingston. So it's a big constituency, but that's just to let people know the geography of the constituency so that your listeners know whether they're an Almond Valley constituent or not. And my constituency office and myself and my team, we are here to help. As I said, my background is as a social worker, so I'm pragmatic to my core, and the most important part of my work is representing constituents. In short, we will always try and help people. So if you have a concern, people can contact me on 01506 460 403, or they can email me at angela.constance.msp@parliament.scot. So if people are needing help or have worries, they should feel free to contact me and my team. If we're not the right person to help you, we will signpost you to who can help you. If we can help, we will. That's our motto. Here to help. If we can find a way to help, we will. We'll always be honest with people, and if there are some things that we are not best placed to help with, we'll always do our best to signpost people on.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Angela. And thank you. That's been really helpful. So, well, listeners, that brings us to the end of this interview, and we hope you've enjoyed it, and we hope to bring you another feature very soon.